So what does that mean? It allows one to train at the weight that they need for that day, for that set. For instance, one of the areas that it became the most useful for us was in-season training. If you have two athletes that play the same position, and one is the starter, and he might receive 80 or 90% of the plays, and then the backup might get 10%, if that. Well, the whenever you're coming in the day after the game, the person who was the starter is going to have a smaller bank, if you will, for training because they put everything that they had in their bank out for the competition on the previous day. Whereas the person who didn't put everything out, they have got more money in the bank left, so to speak, to be able to go and put that towards training. So that allowed the person who was the starter to utilize a load that was appropriate for them that day, and for the other athlete who was not receiving nearly as much playing time, for them to continue to develop in strength, hypertrophy, whatever the trait happened to be. Now, we have to realize that in this world of strength and conditioning, of course, the word strength is in there, so we're going to be pushing that. But getting stronger is only part of the equation. I mean, we know that force equals mass times acceleration. So by continually increasing the mass, of course, you're going to be able to produce more force. But if we can improve the acceleration as well, we can see that. And we know that expressing force quickly may be more important than strength down the line for performance. What do I mean by down the line? Well, when somebody's weak, getting stronger causes them to be more powerful. However, it doesn't always work that way. Now, we have to look at this set principle or transfer of trainness. Now, what do I mean by that is that whenever somebody is weak, the stronger that they get, the better everything else is going to get. But there's a time and place where that no longer occurs. Now, Bompa always said that all strengths relate back to absolute strength. And I believe he was right for an untrained lifter or somebody who is more in the beginner aspects of things. But after somebody gets strong, it again goes back to the set principle. And if you want to be fast, you've got to train fast. If you want to be slow, transfer. That was a mantra that I would always be preaching whenever we had the VBT devices out on the floor. Now, why is it so important? Well, if we look at this Hakkinen and Kramer, and Hakkinen, it turns out he's actually the producer of this slide, this figure, we can get some great insight. The solid line is somebody who's untrained. Okay, this is both groups at baseline. Then we see this dashed line is heavy resistance strength train, and this dotted line is explosive ballistic. If we go all the way out to 500 milliseconds, we see that heavy resistance strength training is obviously king. They produce the most force. Then we look at the explosive ballistic strength train. And we see that they are second, and the untrained, of course, is third. Now, if we go back over to the 200 millisecond mark, and the 200 millisecond is important because this is the time frame at which people typically have to produce force rapidly within sport. We can see that at this 200 millisecond standpoint, explosive ballistic training is actually far and away the king for who produces the most force, which would be utilized in sport. So it's not just about strength, it's about how quickly you can develop strength as well. So that being said, I have given talks before and I have had people say, oh, because of you, everything that we do now is based off of velocity. I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do that at all. I believe that is a huge mistake. So, at the base is work capacity and mobility. If somebody does not have the requisite ability to get into position or the work capacity to be able to recover from set to set, that's where they need to start. Then we're going to be looking at developing base strength, and that's that 60 to 75% of 1RM, looking on those myofibrillar adaptations. Then we're going to be starting into the absolute strength, so getting up to that 85, 90, 95% of 1RM to work on Henneman size principle. And then after you develop that fully, only then should you be looking at the specific strength. So there's a lot of things that need to be developed, and I would consider velocity-based training to be more of a intermediate to advanced training protocol than something that would be appropriate for beginners. Now, looking at this is a workout for shot putters that I wrote back in 2011. And if you look at the workout, you'll see that there's 1, 2, 3 exercises that have velocities listed. And we see other exercises that it might be considered a good idea for. We look at split jerk, then we see hang snatch. Those are two Olympic lifts that are typically athletes benefit from doing speed on. Then we see a squat and we see a bench press. So we can see up to 7 exercises that'll typically be receiving velocity. But I didn't. It's not an end-all be-all. I had it on 3 exercises. There was 2 of them that I wanted to focus more on the technique than the speed with the jerk and the snatch. So eventually I would have had it for a total of 5 exercises for that week. Why did I have it on them? Again, because I wanted them to focus on the technique because they were not very proficient at it. And then some might say, well, what about the squat and the bench press? How come you didn't throw it on there? All I cared about during that phase was moving strength, moving load, increasing strength, and learning how to strain. And velocity was irrelevant for those athletes in that. Now, there are people it might be relevant for looking at velocity loss for specific hypertrophy and making sure that you're only training certain types of